Hello, welcome to the Self Learning Podcast by Dr. Sushma Singh. Let us start discussion on Unit 7 Structure and Growth of Economy, Poverty, Surplus, and Unevenness. There has been a marked structural transformation of the Indian economy in the 1990s, that of the 1980s. The intersectoral composition of gross domestic product (GDP) underwent a significant change after the initiation of reform process in 1991. The services sector has come to occupy a place of prominence in terms of relative contribution to GDP. The relative share of agriculture and allied activities in GDP during the period 1992 to 1993 and 1997 to 1998 declined to 27.5% from 34.5% in 1980 to 81 to 1990 to 91. On the other hand, the share of industry increased from 23.2% to 25.9%, and that of the services sector moved up substantially from 42.2% to 46.6% in the same period. This compositional shift in favor of the services sector has been brought by accelerated expansion in the service sector output at a rate of 8.4% in the period 1992-93 to 1997-98, compared with 6.5% during 1981-82 to 1990-91. There has been a relative decentration in the performance of agriculture during the 1990s, despite favorable monsoon, increase in net irrigated area and positive terms of trade. The decline in public investment and limited infusion of new technologies may have contributed to the poor performance of agriculture. However, the Indian economy attained and maintained a high GDP growth in the 1990s despite substantial deceleration in agricultural growth. For example, in 1995-96, when the economy achieved a record of 8.6% in GDP, the agriculture sector witnessed a negligible 0.2% growth over the previous year. In fact, as the RBI report of the Currency and Finance 1998-99 states that the recent years' experience shows that the growth of services sector has imparted much of resilience to the economy, particularly in terms of adverse agriculture shocks. Thus, economic growth is becoming less vulnerable to agricultural performance and to vagaries of monsoon. While the improvement in growth has emerged from both the industrial and services sectors, there is a marked difference in the sectoral composition of growth as between these two major sectors. Within the industrial sector, the major impetus to growth has come from manufacturing, while both mining and quarrying and electricity, gas and water supply registered lower rates of growth. The services sector, on the other hand, experienced higher growth in a more uniform and consistent manner, with sectors like trade, hotels, restaurants, storage, and communication, whereas financing, insurance, real estate, and business services are experiencing high trend growth rate. A possible interpretation of this phenomena could be an upsurge of industry related services sector in the recent years. Now let us move to the next point, growth performance of the states. There is considerable variation in the performance of individual states, with some states growing faster than the average and others slower. The degree of dispersion of growth rates across states increased very significantly in 1990s. The range of variation in the growth rate of state domestic product (SDP) in the 1980s was from a low of 3.6% per year in Kerala to a high of 6.6% in Rajasthan, a factor of less than 2. In the 1990s, the variation was much larger, from a low of 2.7% per year from Bihar to a high of 9.6% per year from Gujarat, a factor exceeding 3.5. The differences in performance across states become even more marked when we allow for the differences in the rates of growth of population and evaluate the performance in terms of growth rates of per capita (SDP). The variation in growth rate in the 1980s ranged from a low of 2.1% for Madhya Pradesh to a high of 4.0 for Rajasthan, a factor of 1:2. In the 1990s, it ranged from a low of 1.1% year in Bihar and 1.2% in Uttar Pradesh to a high of 7.6% per year in Gujarat, with Maharashtra coming next at 6.1%. The ratio between the lowest Bihar and the highest Gujarat is as much as 1:7. The increased variation in growth performance across states in the 1990s reflects the fact that whereas the growth accelerated for the economy as a whole, it actually decelerated sharply in Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and Orissa, all of which had relatively low rates of growth to begin with and were also the poorest states. There was also a deceleration in Haryana and Punjab, but the deceleration was from relatively higher level of growth in 1980s, and these states were also the richest. 6 states showed acceleration in the growth of SDP in 1990s. The acceleration was particularly marked in Maharashtra and Gujarat, both of which were among the richer states. But there was also acceleration in West Bengal, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Madhya Pradesh, all belonging to the middle group of states in terms of per capita (SDP). It is important to note that the high growth performers in the 1990s were not concentrated in one part of the country. The 6 states with growth rate of SDP in the 1990s above 6% year are fairly well distributed regionally, that is Gujarat 9.6% and Maharashtra 8%. In West Bengal 6.9%, in the East Tamil Nadu 6.2%, in the South and Madhya Pradesh 6.2% and Rajasthan 6.5% in the North. Now let us wind up the session and take rest. Thank you very much for engaging yourself with the self-learning podcasts.